Recording. Here we go.
I was just going to ask if we wanted to do an intro separate than this recording or just make the recording itself the introduction each time.
Yeah. We're trying to ramp up our energy this time. You're standing.
I am, yes. This is new for me.
I'm sitting, but I'm trying to be more energetic.
That is very good.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Cool. So what's on? You want to do an intro?
I don't know.
Yeah. We don't really have a name for this thing yet.
No, but that's kind of the fun of doing this thing and documenting the process.
Yeah.
We were trying to think of a name this week.
We know that we want to talk about storytelling and we want to talk about marketing. That's kind of where our experience lies. I just realized I still have these headphones in. I don't really need that. That's a little distracting. So we'll end up with some name that falls into those two categories where they cross over, which I think that they cross over very much so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And other marketing companies have capitalized on that same idea,
Yeah.
which is brilliant. And I think there's more to explore there as well. So one thing I like about our conversations, recorded or not recorded, is that we both love to question. So that was something I wanted to pull in there too, like storytelling, marketing, and I think I wrote at one point this week as a description, avid questioners, but I don't know if I like that phrase or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're both very willing to explore a subject, even and not come across as the experts on a subject.
Right. Yeah. No, not at all. And that's part of what's appealing me about this too, is being able to ask you questions and just like we were talking off mic earlier about how we process stuff, and you were saying you were a very verbal processor, that you think by talking, and I'm kind of the opposite. I think, and then talk about it.
Yep.
So this is a good experience for me to practice just talking and not having to feel like I'm an expert on something before talking about it.
Absolutely.
So hopefully anyone listening will go along with the journey of just what we're doing.
Yeah, practicing. So in the last week, so from last Friday to this Friday, which this is number 2 in a row. Mm-hmm. That's a milestone. That'll be fun to keep track of.
Yeah.
From last Friday to this Friday, I recorded that podcast with you. I actually did another podcast that I was working on, and I wrote 2 blog posts for my personal site on evanchastain.com that I've never done before.
Yeah.
So I think I'm really working on trying to increase my prepared communication skills. I feel like I've got a really good hold on what do I call it? Social
interaction.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Unprepared social interactions.
Sure.
I thrive in those environments. So preparing for a podcast or preparing for writing a blog post and communicating my thoughts is difficult for me.
Yeah. Well, tell me, so is your goal in creating the blogs or any kind of structured communication? Your goal is to just get better at those things, or is it to flex those muscles you don't normally flex? Are there multiple purposes in what you're doing?
Probably, yeah. That's a good question. I think for me, the first word that comes to mind is practice. So I am practicing something that I would like to have a skill set in. Yeah. And I've never really, I've always wanted those skill sets, and I think now in my life I've got time and a little bit of margin to focus on things that I've always wanted but never tried or never practiced, because I know practice is a big part of it.
So what were the 2 blog posts? What's the content?
So one of them is kind of like poetry.
Uh-huh.
It's called My Heroes Are All Dead.
Yeah.
And the other one
you need some new heroes then.
That leads to the end of the poem leads to that.
Cool.
And I forget what the last line was, but in death, out of death comes life.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So it's really dying to my idea of the hero, not the hero itself.
Right.
That I'm attempting to communicate through
Oh, that's
poetic language.
I like that.
Not rhyming poetic language.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other one was called "The Leaves Are the Saints." And it came from me raking leaves last weekend on All Saints Day on November 1st. And thinking about my mom who had passed away years ago, and all the others that came before us and passed away, and the way that the leaves are such a beautiful example for being and giving of themselves. The line that the repetitive line in that poem, if you will. I don't know if I can call it a poem or not. That seems so weird. The repetitive line is always fading, giving of themselves for the other. And that's my idea of a leaf, and that's my idea of a saint. I guess.
That's cool.
So
that's great.
Thinking of them.
So these are not practical marketing tips.
No.
These are artistic expressions of deep thought.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Which I this past year. So I went on an RV journey this last year.
Yeah.
And 8 months on the road with a lot of margin, and for the first time was able to explore, I guess, artistic expression on my own that I didn't have to put out for anybody. And I think I'm reaching the point where I would like to start expressing some of that through this podcast and through my blog, if you will. Through my blog. I want to do that, I guess. I don't know why I feel weird or not confident saying that.
That's great. I often feel like my artistic expression, what I do in screenwriting is artistic, but it's also very structured. It's very long form. It's very collaborative. And so it doesn't feel like sitting down and writing a piece of poetry, right?
Yeah.
In terms of content, I try to write every couple of days at least something inspirational for young writers. And so as opposed, I was doing blog for a little bit. Blog just felt a little too like I have to make it good. I have to make it, I have 3 points or what, I fit into a certain mold. Yeah. So I just started on Facebook where I would post these kind of rambling, encouraging things.
Is it any type of writer? Is this something that I would benefit reading, or is it specific to a niche audience?
Here's my take is I think that any lesson that applies for a screenwriter is going to apply to a writer, is going to apply to anyone doing life, right? So, and it's kind of what we talk about with, how storytelling influences marketing. I think it's a little deeper than I think storytelling influences every human being, right?
Agreed.
So everyone's on some sort of journey. So we can talk about screenwriting in terms of telling a story that's a journey, or we can talk about screenwriting as you, the writer, are on a journey. You're trying to get somewhere. You're going to face obstacles. And the thing that is most my message right now that I'm trying to get out there is just a better understanding of what that journey looks like for screenwriters. A lot of screenwriters have this idea that, and this applies to really any job and any human being, which I think is great and applicable, that most writers think that they write one thing and they put it out there and they're going to get recognized and pulled up the ranks and be rescued. And it's just not how it works. Now, occasionally you'll get some article in a newspaper or magazine that tells that story. Yeah. And it's such an appealing story that it keeps being told.
Yeah.
Even though it's inaccurate.
It's an outlier.
Right. For 99.9% of people. But
do you think those outliers are necessary for people to begin? Like, do you think you need to have that story of the outlier to even get you started? Is there a place for those stories?
That's a positive look at that. I think they're way more destructive than helpful.
Okay.
I would much rather the narrative be, yes, it's going to take 10 to 15 years. Yes, it's going to take a lot of failure and struggle. But the difference in that is, to me, being rescued is not that romantic of a story. And you see it even in our fairy tales being told right now, that, the Disney stories, the princess used to be rescued by a prince, and now they rescue themselves.
She's on her own hero's journey now.
Right, right. So,
I agree.
So that's so much more appealing to me. And that's the story I want people to live. And in general, everybody has that mindset. Everybody launching a brand or something says, "Oh, I want immediate success with it, and when I don't get it, it must be a failure. I must not be meant to do this," because that Cinderella story is crammed down our throats so often. We don't see all the behind the scenes. I mean,
Right.
even saying we don't see what all went into it feels kind of like a cliche now, like everybody says that. But I
Right.
don't think people really believe it because that story is still so appealing.
Interesting. I think that is not exactly. That is a form of my thoughts on All Heroes Are Dead,
Yeah.
because I think we view the heroes as our outliers when we are all the heroes, right?
Right,
Like
right.
we're all the ones doing the rescuing, not the ones
Yeah.
being rescued. And so that is I think that goes very
Yeah. No, that's
closely.
great.
Similarly, saying what I was attempting to say in the All My Heroes Are Dead.
Right, right.
Like all those outlier stories that I've believed, they've died, and I've moved past them to
Right.
the hard work
Yeah.
and
And
put
there's
in
power
the 15
in the
years.
journey, right? I mean, like without going through the journey, you are ill prepared for being at the end.
Totally.
Right? So that story goes against that too. Like if you don't go through the journey, you're not going to be ready to perform.
So this is a question I have posed to you, and let me know if we're not getting to something that like you want to talk about today as well.
No, we definitely are. This all the thing I wanted to bring up is very closely tied to this as well.
Okay, so the beginning of the journey, the idea of the journey, I think in the last couple of years I realized I was on the journey, like capital T, capital J, the journey, which seemed like to me the first, like the beginning of the journey, even though it had been going on for a long time. So how important is recognizing that you're on the journey and that the journey has very specific attributes that you can recognize where you're at on it without I want to say without feeling negativity, but the feelings aren't what I'm trying to get at. Without judging it, I guess. Without judging where you're at on the journey.
To be okay that you are at a place where you don't want to be.
You're right. Well, even before, how important is it to realize that you're on the journey?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question, and I think it's very important. I think I always joke with writers that we're so good at kind of writing a story about a character, about a hero story that we're telling that has a 3-act kind of structure, and all writers learn this 3-act structure, and they're so good at writing it, but they're so bad at applying it to their own lives. They're so bad at recognizing it in their own lives. You know, we know the structure, we study it, and then when it applies to ourselves, we want to skip the whole second act. We want to go from first act to the third act, and we don't recognize that in ourselves. I think ultimately, if you don't know you're on the journey, you're just going to have a much harder time. It's going to be much more frustrating. It becomes a black and white, yes or no type of situation as opposed to an arc.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
That's a very dualistic way to live your life.
Yeah, and which is so depressing. And I've lived a lot of my life that way. And what ends up happening is when you're living a yes or no life and you get the no, then it's over.
Right.
You know,
right.
I mean, and that's such a depressing way to live. Instead of saying, hey, you're on step 2 of 7.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And here's what like 3 through 7 look like. What you know you're gonna have to kind of go through.
And they all have meaning for you.
Right.
Not just the beginning and end. Every step has a purpose and meaning for sure.
Yep. Even the outlier stories, I would say those people or those circumstances that we look at as the outliers are not exempt of the journey.
Right.
Like there's a crashing that comes from it.
Yeah.
Like there's a crashing down the road.
Yeah.
And we hear stories of people. I think it's Jim Carrey that quoted this, and I held on to it. I wish everybody could achieve fame to realize it's not what they really want.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
I love that quote.
You achieving what the outlier achieved is not the goal even
Right.
of the journey. It's not the end point of the journey.
Right. Well, what they tell you, I mean, like, really the journey resets itself, right? As soon as you get to the end, you're at the beginning again.
You're back home.
That's right. Yeah.
You left and realized that the treasure was back home all along.
So why is that? Why do we always have to be on a journey? Why can't we arrive and relax at some point?
Goodness. So from what I know of the hero's journey, in particular, and there may be other journey identifications that we could talk through. That's the only one I'm aware of that I kind of go off of. There's usually, or maybe there's always, a call to adventure. And that call looks very different, but there's a stirring. I think Rob Bell talks about it in his podcast as a restlessness. And he describes that restlessness using words, but as he described it, I could feel in my body the restlessness he was talking about. Yeah. And I think in my life, the restlessness is the call. So you said, why can't we just get there and rest?
Right, yeah.
Because while we're there resting, I think it can be achieved at some point or another, or you can reach that place, but out of rest comes restlessness. And that is the call to the adventure. That's the call to the journey. And it's again leaving the known to enter the unknown to end up back where you were.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that answers your question of why can't we stay?
Well, I have a theory.
Yes, let's hear it.
That is the universe and evolution and everything, its goal is to bring human beings together.
Like going out and coming in.
Right.
You're using this motion with your hands like
hand.
your hands are going from out to in, and I think that's an important note.
Okay, yeah, I think I was not really thinking about doing that, but yeah. And if we're to be brought together with other humans, we can't do that at rest. At rest, we're satisfied. We don't need other people. And this goes into what I wanted to bring up this week, was this idea of social capital. Of when I look at successful people, it's not how talented they are. It's not how driven they are. It's who they're surrounded by. And I think some people are very naturally surrounded by people because of personality.
Yeah.
That they're outgoing. They're good with people. They don't suffer from any kind of social anxiety kind of things. Or they are, I think, this idea of privilege. You're born in money. You're born in a society where you're more confident asking for things, where you have the mindset that good things come to you, as opposed to growing up with less, and then you have this scarcity mindset. Right. There's all these kinds of things that go into that. And so I'm always pressing this on writers that I talk to, of the need to build your tribe and to reach out to people. Now, for writers, traditionally, we're a very quiet, shy, introverted bunch, because that's why we write. It's our way to express ourselves because we can't do it with words.
Gotcha.
And oftentimes there's a lot of social anxiety. A lot of times building the social capital is very difficult for writers. So I wanted to present to you that question of how do people build that social capital? How important is it? Maybe we talk about the hero's journey of the mentor, the guide, or the other people that you bump into along the way. Just thoughts on building that up for someone that doesn't have it, maintaining it once you do have it. Yeah. How important it is to bring people in and move on, or they go on the journey with you. What are your thoughts on all that?
That's really intriguing. I wouldn't consider myself a writer in the category that you're describing as a writer. So to me, thinking about the question is a new question for me. Social interactions have always come fairly easy to me, and social capital. So let's define that real quick. Social capital is the social influences you surround yourself with. What are we saying that is?
Yeah, I think I would kind of, I need a good definition for it, because I've been using that term a lot. And I'm not even totally sure that term is accurate. Yeah. But it kind of made sense to me. your social assets, right?
Okay.
So who your tribe is, who you're surrounded by, who when you need something you reach out to.
Or when they need something, they reach out
Exactly.
to you. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. So those things have come fairly easy to me, and I also have a mindset of this is something I've learned about myself, self-discovery, using different tools, is that my type, if you will, often doesn't want to need anybody else. So my social capital
Interesting.
is usually, I think of it in terms of like, oh, I'm just going to do everything on my own. I don't want to need anybody else. So I think that's maybe where I would take it and challenge myself is how can I be okay with needing others to get where I need to go on the journey. That's
interesting. Because really you feel like you have it but you don't need it. Yeah. And I feel like I need it but don't have it.
Interesting.
Or that especially in the past, I've gotten much better at. When I was growing up, I was painfully shy, terribly socially awkward, a lot of anxiety, but there wasn't the word of anxiety when I was growing up, So to put a word on it now is life-changing in retrospect even.
That's awesome.
And so, but I had to become good at it by nature and by needing to get out and especially as an artist, playing in a band, being a writer, being a filmmaker, that was a required skill. And so I had to learn how to take that on, as painful as it was. And now whenever I tell somebody, oh, I'm kind of socially, they're like, no, you're not. What are you talking about? Which is a great compliment. But I still feel it every time I walk into a room,
Interesting.
But I think because of that, like, it is kind of like what I was talking about earlier, the kind of privilege thing. It's not necessarily money privilege, but there's a bit of personality privilege. I mean, like you look at CEOs, they're all pretty much the same personality. Like on Myers-Briggs, they all kind of fit a certain thing, right? Because they have something in them that is they're driving to the top. They're good with people. They have a boisterous kind of attitude about them.
They're tall.
Generally, that's right. So there are certain things that give people privilege in that world. And I find the fact that you feel like you don't need it really fascinating. And I wonder if that's not, like I was talking about, when you start with money or you start with no money, how your perspective of the world changes.
Yeah.
The scarcity mindset versus I'm okay where I'm at. If it's not the same thing with a personality that, like, I started life with, I need people because I'm so bad with people, and you're like, I'm so good with people so I don't need them. Yeah. But there's something really curious about that.
No doubt. That is very intriguing. I don't know if I have any I'm going to be doing some thinking on that.
Yeah. We should just have a podcast where we just think. Like, okay, we're starting thinking now.
I think that's called meditation.
Right.
And I would love to record some meditations as well. I think that's something, I'm saying it out loud for the first time, that I would like to do this year.
I know. Now we should do guided thinking. Like instead of like meditation, but like about like,
I think that would attract a different personality type.
Yeah.
So the word meditation has a connotation that certain people don't want to participate in.
Right, yeah.
But if there's a guided thinking exercise that looks eerily similar to a meditation to somebody who's never done a meditation.
Right. And especially if it's focused on a certain subject that, is a certain niche or something.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I like it.
Cool. Well, this was a great convo today.
Yeah.
A lot of good stuff to think about.
No doubt. I feel like there's a lot more to explore, and I'm sure we're going to have some off-mic conversations as well.
We'll have to do a sequel.
Yeah, no doubt. We didn't come up with a sign-off yet either. Ending, no. We got to figure, I guess, just how to end a conversation is a weird concept.
Evan, thank you for the conversation today.
Thank you, Hudson.
This was really great.
I noticed the eye contact that you just gave me when you were saying that, so thanks.
Good, I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
I feel like I make better eye contact when I'm listening than when I'm talking. Like when I'm talking, like my brain is doing too much to look someone in the eyes.
I agree.
Yeah. You mean you also do that, or you agree that I do that?
Well, I haven't noticed that you do it, but even as I was just thinking about my answer there, I looked away from you to have to think of what I was gonna say.
And I think the eye contact while listening is the more important of the two if you had to choose one.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, we
Cool.
may cut this end part out.
Yeah. Hey, but if you were curious about that subject from last time,
Yeah.
yeah, let's just end it by just being like, hey, thanks for the talk today.
Yeah.